Good afternoon, space flight enthusiasts, and welcome to another Angry Bulletin. Today, we're going to do a reaction video of sorts. It's been a little while since I've done one of these. I usually do reaction videos not to other videos, but rather to scholarly articles, opinion-related articles, that sort of thing, to give my views on an important subject, a subject that someone who's pretty knowledgeable in the field, somebody who has a substantial reputation or highly respected reputation anyway in regards to space flight or space science or aliens, UFOs, whatever you want to talk about. I sometimes will do these reaction videos, and this particular one is one of the most important opinion pieces that has been put out recently because it was released by three experts in the field of human spaceflight, people who all worked for NASA for a considerable amount of time. They're bringing decades of experience to the table. These are people who have been responsible for and have overseen successful human spaceflight year after year for quite some time with NASA. Granted, they were probably also in place at least for the Columbia disaster. I would say all three of them probably experienced that, so I can't say that they have a flawless record, but they were also at NASA when SpaceX managed to accomplish the commercial crew contract and get a privately developed spacecraft into operation. That, of course, is the Crew Dragon, whereas Boeing failed miserably to accomplish their goal of getting a human-rated, privately developed spacecraft into space. Granted, they've gotten it into space a few times, and it's always had significant problems, and in my opinion, they should never try to launch that damn thing again. But we're not here to talk about Starliner. We're here to talk about Artemis and talk about getting to the moon. And these three gentlemen put together this opinion piece, this article, talking about the current state of Artemis and whether or not we stand the slightest chance of beating the Chinese to the moon. That is to say, we are assuming that China will land on the moon by 2030, as they say they're going to. That is, put human beings on the surface of the moon. And they have a pretty damn good plan to make all of this happen. It is a two-pronged plan, actually, that involves an expendable rocket and an expendable lander, a lot more like Apollo, except a larger lander, bigger cargo, that sort of thing. But really not too different from Apollo to start off with, and then graduating to reusable rockets like Starship. You have essentially a Starship clone. The reason that so many people are taking China seriously on all of this is because they're making a lot of tangible progress, both in terms of the rocket and the landers, but on top of that, they have an incredible reputation when it comes to actually succeeding in keeping to their schedule. Unlike NASA and the Artemis program, China seems very, very determined to deliver every step of their program exactly as planned, exactly on schedule, and for the most part, without mistakes. China has set several probes now on the surface of the moon and has even done sample return missions from the moon, bringing samples back from the moon for the most part without any hiccups at all. They've been immensely successful so far, much, much more successful than the NASA CLIPS program has been up to this point. That being the case, then, I think it's very rational to assume that China will probably put humans on the surface of the moon by 2030 or somewhere in that vicinity, at the very least 2031 or 2032. So the question is, where is Artemis? Where is NASA? And of course, with NASA, we also have to add SpaceX, because SpaceX is the only company that's been granted an HLS, Human Landing System contract, that stands the slightest chance of putting humans on the surface of the moon before 2030. So the big question is, with all the pieces still missing in this puzzle, can Artemis get the job done? Can NASA beat China to the moon and put human beings on the lunar surface before 2030? The answer is, at least according to these three gentlemen, absolutely not. So the three authors of this opinion piece are as follows. Doug Lavero, who is the former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Space Policy and former Associate Administrator for Human Exploration and Operations at NASA, and Doug Cook, who is former NASA Associate Administrator for the Exploration Systems Mission Directorate with a NASA career of 38 years at the Johnson Space Center and NASA headquarters, and finally, Dan Dumbacher, the former CEO of the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics, a professor of engineering practice at the Purdue University School of Aeronautics and Astronautics, and a former Deputy Associate Administrator for Exploration Systems and Human Exploration and Operations Mission Directorate at NASA headquarters. All three of these guys are serious NASA veterans who worked their way up in the NASA chain of power. And let me tell you something, I can't think of people any more qualified to assess the current state of Artemis and our chances of setting down on the moon. So let's just go ahead and get into the article. Quote, "The recent passing of retired Navy Captain Jim Lovell, an astronaut and one of our great American heroes, propelled many of us back to the iconic scenes from the superb retelling of the Apollo 13 movie in 1995. The three of us lived through that fateful mission in 1970 as the astronauts and mission control team dealt with critical issue after critical issue with the crippled Apollo command module and watched as Tom Hanks' line, 'We just lost the moon,' became true. Metaphorically, we as a nation now stand at that same moment. Over the past decade, as critical delay after critical delay has slowed NASA's Artemis schedule, first from the Space Launch System, yeah, that was a big problem, then the Orion capsule, and most recently, irrespective of Flight 10's success, the Starship lander, it has become clear that we are once again about to lose the moon. This time, though, it's not about a single mission. It's about America's leadership in space. All three of us have, at one time in our careers, been in charge of NASA's Human Exploration program, and we have had the privilege over a combined century of leading some of the nation's most important and most complex space programs in the DoD, the National Reconnaissance Office, and at NASA. To us, it is indisputably clear that the plan for Artemis will not get the United States back to the moon before China. It's important upfront to appreciate that none of us are saying this is because we don't believe in the critical role that commercial space companies are playing and will continue to play in our future. None of us are beholden to any large space firm. Each of us has, in fact, worked tirelessly to help new space firms become part of the larger government space ecosystem. We believe that continued U.S. leadership in space will rely on the likes of SpaceX, Blue Origin, and many others over the coming decades as we open those new space frontiers. So far, I don't disagree with anything that they've said, but let's go ahead and continue. All three of us support President Trump's vision that we must reform NASA and move off the old, expensive ways of doing business and to truly embrace the entrepreneurial space zeal that has made space cool again. But all that enthusiasm cannot change the cold, hard facts that the current program is in trouble, that the mission date for Artemis 3 has been pushed back year after year since it began, and that the success of a single Starship flight does little to assure that a lander will be ready within the next 5 years. In fact, the number of technical hurdles SpaceX has thus far overcome pales in number and complexity to those that lie ahead. And yes, I totally agree with that, and anybody who watches my content knows that I've been saying this for quite some time. While SpaceX has proven time and again to be able to conquer tough technical issues, it's the scale and number of challenges still to go that make this time different. As an example, in NASA's original contract selection statement, NASA identified a significant weakness in SpaceX's technical approach. Quote, "Due to SpaceX's complicated concept of operations, SpaceX's mission depends on an operations approach of unprecedented pace, scale, and synchronized movement," unquote. The unprecedented scale at that time reflected the need for SpaceX to do between 6 and 10 never-before-attempted in-space cryogenic refuelings in a compressed and uncertain time frame. As with many technical challenges that have never been attempted, the problems get harder, not easier, the more you learn. Today, NASA estimates that the operation will require somewhere between 15 and 20 refuelings. By the way, I'm not sure if I agree with that. I'm still taking SpaceX's word that 10 will be enough, but still, it could be 15 to 20. If it is, I don't see how we're going to get that job done this decade. Plus, the development and pre-positioning of a fuel depot intermediary in space. We do not know the exact time period for those launches because neither NASA nor SpaceX has told us. But this pace of operations would be nothing less than historic and appears to represent a faster operational tempo than even Falcon 9. A far smaller and far simpler rocket has managed to achieve after a decade of flying. Even when all that work is done, it still remains unproven that the now fueled vehicle can be human-rated, can land safely on the moon, and can return our American astronauts safely to Orion for the trip back to Earth. Starship doesn't have to do the whole job for those of you unfamiliar with this process. It just has to pick the astronauts up from the Orion capsule, which is delivered by the Space Launch System to cislunar space, take the astronauts down to the surface of the moon, and then back to Orion. That's its only job, and yet it seems very unlikely that it's going to be able to get that job done this decade, but we'll go ahead and continue with the article. We have nothing but respect for SpaceX's engineering prowess. By the way, so do I. They are an incredible company that have accomplished incredible things. I just doubt that they're going to be able to do what Elon has promised they can do. That's all. And none of us doubt that all of this will eventually happen. But our scars tell us it won't happen quickly, and certainly not on a schedule that keeps the U.S. in the lead. It's notable to recall that when SpaceX was first awarded their contract, and I've pointed this out myself many times, they claimed that they would be able to do it all by 2024. Yet today, as we approach 2026, we are still unable to fly repeatedly with high confidence, much less accomplish those far harder goals. Our intent here is not to impugn NASA or SpaceX's efforts, and this is not a call for Congress to give NASA more money. Rather, this is intended as a wake-up call for all. The Chinese have outlined a bold vision for a lunar base and an eventual mission to Mars, all predicated upon their first manned lunar mission in 2030. Based on their proven and almost unbroken record of successes in achieving their space milestones as planned, we take them at their word. Meanwhile, Congress and the President have made it clear that they expect our nation's space leaders to get there first. The President understands that such goals are not merely about interplanetary exploration. Achieving these goals is about assuring American leadership both on and above the surface of the Earth. The space race of the last century cemented U.S. technological leadership for over 70 years and led to the scientific and industrial supremacy that defeated communism and laid the foundation for sustained economic advantage. We don't have a crystal ball, and we can't say for sure that the winner of this 21st century space race will get to wield that kind of economic lordship over the anticipated multi-trillion-dollar annual space economy. But we don't want to find out by losing. So what can be done? First and foremost, we need ground truth, someone to check our homework. NASA's Artemis program lacks any true mechanism of public scrutiny needed to verify its status, especially for its landers. That's absolutely true. The SLS, because it was a NASA-controlled project, was subject to the NASA Office of Inspector General and their very regular reports on the progress of that rocket or lack thereof. We got every ugly detail, whereas SpaceX is able to hide the truth from the American public and from the NASA OIG. Although I'm pretty certain that NASA is aware of where SpaceX is in the process, because Starship can technically be used for military purposes, and also because it's a private rocket, they can hide the truth from the American public and from many American political leaders. But let's go ahead and continue. So while to us the predicament is crystal clear, that alone can't be the basis for the bold action that will be required if we are right. NASA needs to stand up a truly independent review team immediately to provide an assessment to the acting administrator, the president, and Congress within the next 45 days, because if a plan B is needed, that planning needs to start now. If we are right, then the hard work begins. Right now, we need transparency to confirm for the nation what we think we already know. The stakes could not be higher, and we refuse to allow our nation in this current century to lose the moon. And when it comes right down to it, I couldn't agree with most of what's said in this article more. So in the course of relating that article to you, I also gave you some of my opinions, but at the end of the day, I think for the most part, I was a little shocked as to how much I agree with almost everything that is said in that article. But there are a couple of things that I think these gentlemen fell a little short on. Number one, I think they're painting too rosy of a picture here. I think that very significant fixes need to be put into place on the Artemis program to give NASA and the Western world the slightest chance of beating China to the moon. And also, they didn't explain just how significant the consequences might be if China wins this race. It's not just about leading the way in human space flight, to lose this leadership role to the People's Republic of China, although that's significant enough in itself. We're also talking about exploiting the resources of the moon, something that NASA and the United States failed to do when they had the opportunity in the early 1970s, when NASA had put forward a systematic plan to put much larger payloads on the moon, establish a permanent presence there, and start exploiting the resources there. Although, admittedly, at the time, NASA and the U.S. didn't realize just how many valuable resources existed on the moon. Had they explored further, had they established a permanent presence, they probably would have figured it out decades ago, but they didn't, and so they lost that opportunity, which China now is eager to seize. And if they manage to do this, they will seize a monopoly over some very valuable resources. We're talking about rare earths and rare metals, which the south pole of the moon especially seems to have in abundance. And also lunar ice, if they are able to monopolize that, or at least dominate the most promising deposits of lunar ice, then that allows them to set up fuel manufacturing depots to exploit the rest of the solar system, or just allow them to travel to different locations on the moon, exploiting other mineral resources and helium-3, which could prove invaluable to the future of fusion power. But most importantly, and China has already publicly said that they're going to be doing this, they are going to build an electromagnetic mass driver, sort of an electromagnetic train designed to fling lunar ore from the lunar surface, in other words, ore that's been mined from the moon, where it can be intercepted either in lunar orbit or in low Earth orbit. And that will make exploiting lunar resources even easier. But most importantly, an electromagnetic mass driver can also be used as a weapon. It can fling artificial asteroids towards Earth with deadly precision. And if positioned right off the coastline, say right off the west coast of the United States, can create artificial tsunamis. It would add a deadly and virtually unstoppable weapon to China's arsenal in a future conflict, an advantage that we dare not allow China to have. And yet, given the current circumstances and what these gentlemen have just said in this article, it appears that there's no way to prevent them from doing this unless very, very decisive action is taken. And in that regard, this is where I have to disagree with these three gentlemen as well. They're saying that they're not asking for more money to be given to NASA. But frankly, there's no way to correct this problem without giving them more money. If Lunar Starship isn't going to get the job done in time, then an alternative needs to be designed. A simple alternative needs to be thrown together at the last minute, and that's going to take significant investment. In my opinion, the Dynetics Alpaca is the best solution, given the fact that it was already well along the way in its development, had already achieved its preliminary design reviews. So I would say that's probably the best bet to go with if we want to set down on the moon by 2030. But regardless of what option to Lunar Starship they may come up with, there's no way to make it all happen before 2030 without a significant investment. And now is not the time to do 2020 hindsight, as I've done in some of my videos, and lay blame, say that NASA made mistakes, whatever. Regardless of what mistakes might have been made in the past, that just needs to be forgotten, and a solution needs to be found before we discover that the first words coming from the surface of the moon in the 21st century are being spoken in Mandarin. Thank you very much for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. Also, I'd like to thank some more very generous Patreon supporters who have jumped on board lately to support my channel. Thank you so much for that. And also, really quick, for those of you, those 3i Atlas fans who are watching this particular video, I now have all the volunteers that I need for the project that I talked about in my previous video. For all of you who sent me emails saying that you were interested in participating, thank you so very much. And if you'd like to support this channel as well, all the details are in the description. Thanks again, and until next time, stay angry about space.